We've been talking to Sally Ann Burris of Split the Difference. She's had a project running for a time called Restorative Change, which came to an end abruptly, and she's going to tell us all about it. Tell us, Sally, about Restorative Change. You set it up and what happened?
Okay, so Restorative Change is a whole family service that is centred around the children. It won £500,000 Police and Crime Commissioner funding in 2016 and was designed to produce a intervention that supported a whole family. The remit of the contract, it was a tender that we won, so it was a public offer tender. We won the tender. And the remit of that was to deliver a whole family domestic abuse service centered around the children that was licensed and replicable. So I worked with a consortium of 6 businesses and a couple of private consultants that designed that service. The service was it's a therapeutic intervention, so it works from the premise that we need to deliver a service that kind of answers the therapeutic needs of the whole family. The service also works on a peripheral offer so that it delivers services to wraparound family members or to clinicians or other professionals that are working with the family at the same time.
Could you
So
just
we
tell us
went.
who was in the consortium? Who?
So
What?
there was a children's charity, there was a domestic abuse female charity that did have some history of delivering preventative group work with male perpetrators, and there was Cardiff in the Vale College. At the time, they'd had a massive contract funding from Welsh Government to deliver community-based education services, so they were
Right.
one of our partners. We worked with a consultant who, I assume you know motivational interviewing.
Yes,
One
sure.
of the consultants that was working with us was one of the designers of that intervention.
Right.
So there was a group of us. There was myself. I delivered housing related service and floating support services,
And
And
working
you're,
with
you're a
whole families.
psychotherapist, aren't you, Sally?
I'm a
Amongst other
psychotherapist.
things.
Yeah, I
amongst
got a
other
few.
things, yeah.
I know. I got a few qualifications, and somebody once said to me, "Sally, you love in education." I said, "Well, of course, but yeah, I am a little bit of extreme. But my education is based on my profession. So when I deemed my profession needed me to become educated in another way, then I took that
Yeah,
responsibility and I did
sure.
it. So
So
yeah.
off
So
you
I
went with your consortium. Sorry
no,
to,
it's
to,
okay.
to interrupt you. Yeah.
No, yeah. So we went with the consortium. We took a long time to plan and structure what this needed to look like. Myself, I one of the things that I said is I can't work with anything that is not providing services for men and women equally. So it was non-gendered. It's a non-gendered intervention. It doesn't matter whether the perpetrator or the family is mum and dad, dad and dad, mum and mum. It doesn't matter whether dad is the perpetrator or mum's the perpetrator, or in fact if there's bi-directional harm.
That's
One of
two-way
the
harm, isn't it?
It
Two-way.
is
Yeah.
two-way harm, so
Yeah.
harm is coming from both sides.
Yeah.
So all of us that were involved in this had a minimum of 20 years experience. So all of us had an intervention based, kind of learning. So we were psychotherapists, psychologists, life coach. That was incorporated into that as well. So all of us had a number of experience and learning that we
And that
brought
was
to
at the
this on table.
managerial level, wasn't it? But you also
That
trained your actual practitioners.
Yes, so
Yeah.
out of the intervention, when the intervention was created, we knew that we needed to be able to support everybody that was involved. So one of the people that we worked with was a children's therapist, and what ended up happening, this is a manualized intervention, heavily manualized. It's based on over 30 years theory base, tried and tested theory base. So we knew that the components of that needed to be able to answer the needs. So there's diversity in the therapeutic intervention that would enable. I mean, for example, yeah, I'm a psychotherapist, but I'm also a life coach. I'm trained as a life coach. There's the way these interventions are presented, they kind of leave no gaps for families or for people that are surrounding them, supporting them, because we all work in different ways and we're all motivated in different ways. And we wanted to make sure that we had a diverse background wrapped up in this intervention that kind of met most people's needs, you know, and where they were currently in their lifestyle. We know, for example, and you will know this, that some people will pull against certain interventions just because it's called psychotherapy, or just because you're a psychiatrist, because it brings a lot of, you know, the medical model brings a lot of stuff. So we wrapped a lot of things in there that allowed somebody to feel that they could step into that world, and then they had the ability to pull on certain resources. So we had a therapeutic intervention that lasted 24 weeks. The family don't have to leave after 24 weeks. If because there's peripheral offers. So, for example, there's a core therapeutic intervention, which means that mum and dad, or mum, dad and dad, can tap into psychotherapy, and they will work on a one-to-one basis with a therapist. Then the children then have their own space with their own intervention and therapist. Now, when
I thought that was wonderful, Sally, when you spoke about that to us earlier. Wonderful idea.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, we were very careful because we were all tuned in to how therapy can actually cause harm. I mean, I mean that with the people that are not trained properly.
Yeah.
For example, at the moment we're hearing a lot about trauma-informed interventions. Well, I always get like the hairs on the back of my neck always start prickling, because I know that services are so into this trauma-informed thing at the moment that when they use that, what they mean is somebody who's gone on a course for 2 days and then feels that they understand trauma, what trauma means, and then they go into these families. And what we know is that you can re-traumatize people just by taking them through interventions that are really not understood, or the people are not qualified within them. So we made sure that the intervention for the children was heavily weighted around theory and education. So we wanted to make sure that children went through that stage at their capabilities with their emotional and kind of psychological development, because somebody who's 8 years old may not be 8 years old in terms of their emotional development, or even, you know, even their educational development. So we wanted to make sure that we had really good assessment processes that allowed for the therapist to be able to move between the children's needs. And when you've got multiple children in a family, we wanted to make sure that intervention was soft touch and work towards those children's capabilities. So the children have their own intervention.
Yeah.
The remit, we've got a kind of an encapsulating remit, which means that the end of this intervention will mean that the family are either living together safely or they've separated amicably. Okay, and through the family members have separate interventions initially. So children will go with the children worker, mum and dad will go their separate workers. We also have anybody wrapped around the family. So say there's an Auntie Maud next door who's not really Auntie Maud, but she's lived next door to them for 20 years and she's the go-to person when an incident happens. If the family deem that they want her involved because they deem her as somebody that's a key person for the family, or a grandmother or sister or auntie or whatever, they can also be involved in this, okay? So they're also drawn into the intervention. And I mean, it's always a choice-based thing. This is not an authoritative intervention. This is a choice-based intervention. So the families will work together separately, and then they know that the project that they're working on while they're going through these interventions is the creation of a family plan. So so there's an output from their intervention. So if mama is with somebody and dad is with somebody, they're working on how this thing affects them. You know, I mean, we work on basic questions for a lot of the time. There's a system in place. So, you know, it's what's happened, what do you need, who's been affected. Okay, so and they're very good questions, because what they do is it's not just about the I, it's about the we. Okay, there's this thing around, you know, I mean, they're restorative questions. I'm trained as a restorative practitioner as well. So they're restorative based questions, but they've got a very good toolkit that is quite effective in terms of communication. And the questioning actually helps a person to not only think about who they are within any given situation, but also think about how that affects everybody else,
Yeah.
and how possibly it would have affected the family, or also the community, because we're part of a wider community. So they will have gone through this intervention, but they always, in the back of their mind, they're very aware that everything they do and they're going through also contributes to their family plan.
So you're teasing
So
them out of their defensive foxhole
we are,
into the open. So it's
yeah,
into no man's land,
it is,
but so that they feel looked after and safe there.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, one of the things that I love about it personally is that you've got that connectivity. And another thing it does is it removes illusions. Parents who are
Yes.
going through, parents who are going through things that are bigger and kind of more, I don't know, it's almost like they're set in an atom and they can't move, So
Sure.
when you've got people and individuals and then whole families that are in this position, it's very difficult for them to focus on anything, and they end up creating an illusion around that. So you've got mum who says the children never hear it when dad's
Yeah.
screaming, or when I'm screaming at dad, or they never are aware of any contention between us, And
Family
actually that's not,
lies.
it's family lies, yeah, but actually
Yeah.
that's not true. It's simply not true.
Sure. So you got into a pilot. You had to
Yes.
do a pilot. Well, you chose to do a pilot, I think, didn't you?
Yes, yeah. Initially, we were told, when we took the contract out, we were told by the Police and Crime Commissioner's office that there was a pot of money that we could use for an intervention, and that we could run a pilot, and we would be able to have an evaluation with that. Anybody that runs services will understand that once you've created a new intervention, if you don't have the opportunity to run a pilot with that, then you are in a position where it's highly unlikely that that will go anywhere.
But you have to
Because
test something anyway to prove that to yourself that it works, even if you know it.
yeah, exactly.
Of
But
course.
halfway through, our funding was removed, and we ended up having to source funding that was. We were lucky. We got IFST, which is a social services department who run domestic abuse, drug and alcohol services for whole family. All of the children within that will have been on they're on the child protection register, and the families that we were working with were at risk with the children being removed.
Yeah.
So tell us about the pilot. What you had a few families referred.
We did. We had 15 families referred to us very quickly. Part of the intervention, when we took on board creating the intervention, we set aside some of the funding to be able to go, because we believed that we were delivering an evaluated intervention. We set some of the funding aside to be able to network this, and we offered training in Cardiff and the Vale, which is quite a large area. We went into places like schools, colleges, universities, doctors' surgeries, social services department, education. I mean, any service that was wrapped around a family. We went in and gave them training on how to refer into our system and use our referral processes, and actually what we did and how we did it. So we had a trained team that went into all of these places over a period of about, I think it took us 5 months to go in and did mass training to those that would refer into us. So when we set up the pilot, social services already knew what we were doing. So social workers in each team had already received this how to refer training, what the services were. So we very quickly filled 15 spaces of 15 families.
And they were all families with domestic abuse as a central
And
issue.
the children on the register.
Yeah.
So all the children were on the child protection register. Mum and dad had drug and alcohol issues, and there was all had violence within the family.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the outcome?
Tell us the outcome.
So the outcome was all families connected and stayed engaged. All families did the full intervention. The end product was 14 families separated amicably, without the court system in play in that. So previously the court system was very wrapped around these families, but when they separated amicably, the court system wasn't used in that separation, because often as we know, it is. One of those families stayed together violence free. All of the children in those families were taken off the child protection register.
Sally, that is so amazing.
It's a good outcome.
It's tremendous. Yes.
Yeah.
I know. I mean, we're all of us were highly trained, all right, who created this, but all of us, when you do something and you think, we know that we've worked in the system, we've worked with families, we know this is a really good matrix of interventions. But I mean, it even surprised all us. We were blown away by it. We sat back in the chair and thought, "Oh my goodness, we were right."
Absolutely.
We were right.
And what history shows is that the founders of a intervention usually have particularly good outcomes because they're enthusiastic and committed and fully understand it. And when you roll it out, you don't get quite such good results. But of course, you have to have the opportunity to roll it out in order to find out whether how to prove it in the wider population. So what happens next? Because you get that pilot outcome, and so you then go back and say we're ready to roll with our full-on project. What happens?
And no funding. No funding.
Where's the funding gone?
So the funding that we'd been promised had actually gone to it's a women's service, a domestic abuse service, and they had taken the funding for the IDVAs.
How did that happen?
Lots of coercion and lots of kind of it was a very naughty situation, because the person that actually did this was initially a member of our group. And
oh dear.
we had to threaten some legal stuff, but they actually diverted the funding to their own services, which was awful, because it's the third sector. Sometimes they're very. I mean, I've worked in this system for like over 30 years. They are the most cutthroat of all businesses there, and there's a very big illusion around them being all pink and butterflies and all of that. It's a cutthroat world where the third sector works. So we were left with what showed to be an absolutely excellent intervention.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, this is, the intervention, because we're all academics as well, the intervention's heavily manualized. It has a full training system within it, and it's a licensed intervention. So the idea is never to allow those drop-offs or for services to become blended to the point where that intervention's not working anymore. Sure. So we put all of the components in there would hold that tight. In fact, we're about to publish it. It's going through its checks for publishing, and the idea is for us to put that out there to allow the world to see it and to see it as outcomes.
I hope you're going to be licensing users, though.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Because that's the only way you can control the training and quality.
Exactly. Yeah. And actually, I'm one of the directors. There's two directors of Restorative Change, and Lorna is like super efficient. She's a trained lawyer, but Lorna loves teaching. It's her thing. So Lorna has a site called Bright Link Learning. It's an online learning platform, but Lorna was one of the top managers in Cardiff and the Vale College, and that's how they were part of the intervention, because the intervention's got a heavily therapeutic core to it, okay, but it also has peripheral offers. So I run people-facing services, so I work in my services were debt management, housing, homelessness, drug and alcohol. My services were around education. We had a range. My staff were trained in 16 areas that were core areas when somebody, we all step into society, and if you think of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we have a basis for our needs where we can then step forward and actually thrive within our own lives. My staff were trained in 16 areas, because when a family falls down, it is normally because they are carrying a weight of these other areas, which might be death, it might be debt, it might be they've never been able to put themselves in a good education process, or employment and things like that. So part of our intervention was we recognised that people who were experiencing things like drug and alcohol or violence or whatever were likely to be also experiencing these other things.
Yeah.
So we created what we called a peripheral offer. So a family that were going through the therapeutic interventions, if they were at risk of losing their homes or debt or whatever, they could then tap into a support service that also helped them to work through those things at the same time. So what it would mean was that families, even if they had young people who were known to be offending or starting to go into that offending system, there would be a wraparound service that would also have a peripheral offer for that. So we had these wraparound interventions that also created a stabilization for families so they could focus on their therapeutic intervention without being pulled by these negative things that were added to stress. So the system creates that. So the wraparound service was things like drug and alcohol, debt management, homelessness. It was education and employment, because we wanted to give families the a peripheral offer that allowed them to at least explore those kinds of things, because what we know about therapeutic interventions is it may take, it looks at emotional and historical and behavioral things. I mean, it looks at that kind of thing. And if you're in a life coaching situation and you've got certain interventions in therapy, it'll look at future choices. But on a practical side, it often fails in that, because when you've got a family that's worked and been so insular and is constantly living on this higher kind of this fight or flight kind of realm, the planning and the structure that it takes to even imagine that you can take yourself forward in some way is very difficult.
Yeah.
Can you sorry Sally, but can you make a financial argument for using the intervention, because that's the argument people will put up to try and sabotage you, I imagine.
So you've got a group of educated people who actually believe that we all have a responsibility for each other to some degree. So when we designed this intervention, we used models that were already currently working within society on procurement and funding. So, for example, my wraparound services are a supporting people service, which is done through a procurement. So we took the costings from that and we stuck with those costings. We're in terms of the interventions for the domestic abuse and the therapeutic interventions, we looked at other services out there that were third sector style services and how they priced. So we paid in actual fact, one of the things that I was extremely grateful for, because I love this kind of stuff, is we were audited by Deloitte. So part of the procurement exercise was that we had to accept that we would be audited through Deloitte at the same time. So while we were going through all of the intervention, the creation of it and post it, Deloitte were auditing us. So that was another thing. After we created it and the costings for the service was put up, we then compared the services that we were delivering against services that were currently used through the court system, local authorities, social services and spot purchasing and all that. In actual fact, our services, family interventions, if you've got a family, for the core family, there is no stop on how many families. So if you've got a family that's 4 or 6 or 8 members of that family, the intervention is the same cost. Okay, if you've got peripheral family or supporters that you want to work with, they are included, and that was included in the cost. Now, we based our cost on a 24-week program, but this program can be, the families can step into that, because I mean, we worked on a card-a-dash risk management system, which is used by the police and lots of other intervention areas. I mean, I personally I don't believe that's the best kind of risk measurement. So we incorporated a more intense measurement system into our intervention. And what I've realised is where family members step into a zone. You've got families that may be experiencing domestic abuse but not have the peripheral offer needs around them. Or you may have family members who have got kind of intense issues going on within their families, so they may need to revisit or continue with some of the interventions post the 24 weeks. So we said that we would make sure that these families could re-access or stay within that intervention for up to 1 year. and then and there's an assessment process that goes on. It's heavily assessed and things. Now that process and the costings for that, as soon as we finished, we laid it down beside things like women's services, things like CAMS and the services that they offer, social services and the services they offer. We're actually cheaper than all of them, and we function. And part of me is like. Because one of the things that I was concerned about, our staff are trained, right? We use educated people that are educated in their own remits, whether they're therapists, whether they're in the support mechanisms, whoever they are trained and they're educated. And then on top of that, they are trained with our intervention. So there's a full training package, there's a full training manual that people have to go through to deliver this service. And when we costed it based on all of those, we were still cheaper than Women's Aid.
Okay, so Sally, how's this going to go forward? Because we need to talk, and probably we need to have a separate discussion in a minute about how it goes forward. But the story is
it's incredible, Sally.
It's kind of mad, isn't it? There's something mad about this.
Well, I mean, what we know is because post me doing this, all of us, post us working on this, post us delivering our pilot, and me then, my role was to go into the community because this is a licensed intervention. So I'm very well networked in the service community. I have, because when I started STEPS in 2004, particularly, I became involved in a lot of stuff that was going on in government. So I became part of structure groups, planning groups, or all of that. So I'm really networked. So my role was to go into the service industry, into the service community, and then and tell people what this was about, because the idea is that any organisation can deliver it as long as they keep the training and maintain the license agreement. They can deliver. Otherwise, we withdraw it. So and I kept getting what in the end I found out was blocks from women's services, and I got to the point where I said, right, I'm done with this. And I climbed over that, and I prepared a 3-month. I did some research because I knew that if I was taking this to government, that I would need to give them what they needed to understand to even listen to me. Okay. Just
to illustrate what you mean by being blocked, I think what you described to us was that you were advised or you were encouraged to join certain groups.
Yeah. So
by the people in charge of domestic abuse in your area.
Yeah.
And you never got in.
No. That's got to be the most bizarre experience of my life, because I mean I've chaired things for the National Assembly for Wales, community development stuff, and I've been a critical friend for a local authority. Welsh Government invited me into a group to be a critical friend. So I've done lots of stuff, so I know the mechanisms, and I know from the hierarchy down into frontline services. And Welsh Government asked me, the lead for domestic abuse in Wales. She knew what I was doing, and we'd had a few meetings about that, and she'd said to me, look, Sally, there's 2 groups that are operating within the community at the moment that are planning or structural groups with the intention to look at funding and how domestic abuse funding will be going out across Wales. She said, I would like you to contact, she gave me the full contact details. She said, I'd like you to contact them, and I'd like you to, please join these groups. And I said, okay. So I did what she'd said, and I danced around this for about 3 months, because that's how much I gave the energy to. So I contacted both groups, had discussions, multiple discussions, emails about them, saying, if the one was starting, one was just beginning, the other one had been started for a few weeks. And I spoke to both of them, explained who had referred me to that it was the Welsh lead, and I just got blocked. One of them was telling me, we're just changing where we're having our meetings, I'll get back to you. Lots and lots of stuff going on. One of them was a group that had been engaged with to run a mapping exercise across the whole of Wales on domestic abuse services. That was a Women's Aid group. They just wouldn't engage with me. I sent numerous emails. I copied the Welsh lead in, and they just wouldn't do it. And I tried for 3 months. And then I got very, very frustrated, thinking I can't believe Welsh Government is kind of created this pathway for me to join these things with a whole family non-gender domestic abuse service, and they're blocking. And I was thinking, who's in charge? It's like who's wagging the tail? You know, it's just crazy. You know, it was the most bizarre experience of my life, and I've had a few of them. So I ended up. I know. So
you were tampin by the end of it. I think was the Welsh way of saying it.
It's a very Welsh word of saying tampin. I was very frustrated. I mean, you know, sometimes when we have a door blocked, it kind of motivates us to open a bigger one.
Yeah.
And that's what I did. I thought, right, I'm climbing over you.
Well, let's talk about the bigger door that you can. Let's talk about the bigger door in a minute. So we'll come back and talk about that. But I hope we find you still locked in your bunker there, defended against
against the world.
I know. It's like